She believed a few carefully chosen words were all it would take to have a black man removed from first class, right up until the moment he calmly reached into his pocket and revealed a gleaming FBI badge. Eleanor Vance glided through Hartsfield-Jackson, Atlanta International Airport, her bespoke carry-on whispering smoothly behind her. This particular flight path was a ritual for her, Atlanta to Washington, D.C., and first class was the only world she knew in the sky. Every element of air travel felt like a well-rehearsed play to her. The seamless priority boarding, the welcoming, flute of champagne, the hushed symphony of professionals exchanging pleasantries. She didn't just want comfort and exclusivity, she demanded it. So when she arrived at her row and discovered a black man in an impeccably tailored navy suit already occupying the adjacent seat, her confident stride faltered. He possessed an aura of profound calm, his laptop open, his gaze sweeping across the screen as if he were decrypting state secrets. Eleanor's lips tightened into a thin, disapproving line. She placed her designer tote on the floor with just a fraction too much force and settled into her seat, her displeasure a palpable cloud around her. First class was never meant to be like this. The man beside her, Marcus Sterling, offered her barely a glance. He was immersed, his fingers dancing effortlessly across the keyboard, completely absorbed in his work. The cool light from his screen cast a blue glow on his dark skin, accentuating the sharp, intelligent lines of his face. He wore the composure of a man who belonged exactly where he was. Eleanor, however, remained thoroughly unconvinced. She drew a sharp, audible breath through her nostrils, fidgeting in her seat. Her purse made a deliberate nudge against his armrest. There was no reaction. She sat up even straighter, her eyes scanning the cabin as if summoning a flight attendant to witness and correct this glaring error. Then she escalated. Leaning toward him just enough to invade his space, she made her presence an undeniable fact. "Excuse me," she murmured, her voice a carefully crafted blend of politeness and steel. "Are you quite certain you're in the correct seat?" Marcus didn't bother to look up. "Yes," was all he said. That was it. No further detail. No defensive explanation. She cleared her throat, her gaze darting around the cabin once more. This time she successfully locked eyes with a flight attendant, Clara Thorne, a poised woman in her early 30s who was assisting passengers a few rows ahead. Eleanor raised her hand in a subtle, beckoning gesture. Marcus let out a sigh, so quiet it was almost imperceptible. Yet it was there. Clara approached, her professional smile firmly in place. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" Eleanor managed a small, forced chuckle, shaking her head as if the entire situation were a charming little comedy. "I think there might have been a tiny mix-up. I believe this gentleman has found his way into the wrong seat." Clara's eyes shifted to Marcus, who at last paused his typing and lifted his head. His expression was a perfect mask, unreadable. But a flicker in his eyes spoke volumes, not of surprise, not of confusion, but of something else entirely. Clara consulted the passenger manifest on her tablet, her finger gliding down the screen of seat assignments. "Actually, Mr. Sterling is in his correct seat," she stated with unwavering politeness. "Your ticket indicates 2A, and he is in 2B. Eleanor blinked, her fingers digging into the edge of her armrest. "How peculiar," she said, forcing another hollow laugh. "Are you absolutely sure?" I just assumed." Clara's smile became a little more fixed, already sensing the true nature of the issue. "I'm absolutely certain, ma'am. Everything on our end appears to be in perfect order." A muscle in Eleanor's cheek twitched. Her meticulously controlled facade wavered for just a split second before she plastered on a tight-lipped smile. "Well," she exhaled, "I suppose mistakes can happen." She turned her body pointedly toward the window, but she was far from finished. Not even remotely close. Marcus, meanwhile, had already submerged himself back into his work. Clara lingered. For a moment, the tension in the air almost thick enough to touch, then gave Marcus a brief understanding nod before moving away. But Eleanor was seething. Her fingers began a frantic, silent tap against her knee. Her breathing grew shallow, her eyes darting from the flight crew back to Marcus. He wasn't reacting. He wasn't explaining himself or offering any kind of placating remark. He utterly refused to play the part she had cast for him in her little drama, and that infuriated her more than anything. She was not the kind of woman who simply let things go. But Eleanor is not the type to suffer in silence. She decides to take action. Eleanor sat rigid, arms folded tightly across her chest, her thoughts a whirlwind of indignation. This was utterly wrong. She had been flying first class for decades, and never, not even once, had she been subjected to a situation like this. The man beside her was doing nothing overtly wrong, but that was irrelevant to her. He simply did not belong. Her breath quickened, her irritation simmering dangerously close to the surface. She could not just sit there and passively accept this reality. She pressed the call button. A soft, melodic chime echoed overhead, and Clara Thorne reappeared moments later, her smile still professional, still warm. "Ma'am, is there something more I can help you with?" Eleanor kept her voice a low, conspiratorial whisper, her tone meticulously measured. "I would like to request a seat change." Clara blinked. "Oh, are you uncomfortable? Is there some issue with the seat itself?" Eleanor paused for a barest fraction of a second. She couldn't voice the thought that was screaming in her mind. Instead, she tilted her head subtly toward Marcus, lowering her voice even more. I don't feel comfortable sitting here," she said, each word slow and deliberate. Clara's smile began to falter. "I'm very sorry to hear that, ma'am. If there's a technical issue with the seat, I would be happy to—" "No, it's not the seat," Eleanor interrupted. "It's—" She exhaled sharply. "I would just prefer to sit elsewhere." Clara glanced at Marcus, who had once again stopped typing but had not uttered a single word. He was simply listening, waiting, his fingers hovering motionlessly over the keyboard, his jaw set. "Let me check if there are any other open seats," Clara said, tapping at her tablet. "Just one moment." Eleanor leaned back, her lips pressed into a firm, triumphant line. Marcus didn't react. He didn't argue, didn't acknowledge her, didn't even ask why she felt so uncomfortable. His silence only stoked the flames of her fury. A few rows ahead, a man in a blazer angled his head just slightly, pretending to check his phone, but clearly tuning in. Across the aisle, a woman nudged her husband. People were starting to notice. Clara's fingers danced quickly over the screen. "I'm afraid we are at full capacity in first class today, ma'am. There are no other seats available." Eleanor's stomach tightened into a knot. Clara offered an apologetic smile. "Would you like me to check in economy? There might be a seat available back there." Eleanor's face burned with a sudden hot rage. Economy? As if she would ever. That is not going to work," she managed, her voice catching in her throat. Clara's smile never wavered. "In that case, I hope you don't mind remaining in your assigned seat." Eleanor forced a thin, brittle smile. "I suppose I have no other choice." Clara nodded. "Please let me know if you need anything else." She walked away, but Eleanor barely saw her go. A ringing sound filled her ears. Marcus, still silent, turned back to his laptop and resumed typing. That was it. That was his entire response. He was simply going to pretend she was invisible, her fingers curled into tight fists. This was not over. She exhaled a sharp, angry breath and pressed the call button again. This time, Clara hesitated for a moment before returning. "Ma'am?" Eleanor sat up straighter, her spine like a rod of iron. "I need to speak to someone in charge." Clara's face remained a neutral mask. "I am the lead flight attendant on this flight. Is there something I can clarify for you?" Eleanor's voice sharpened. "I need to speak to the head of the crew or the pilot." A low murmur rippled through the cabin. Someone let out a quiet, disbelieving chuckle. Clara's expression remained professional, but her patience was visibly fraying at the edges. "Ma'am, the pilot is currently preparing for takeoff and will not be available. However, I'm more than happy to assist you." Eleanor pursed her lips, her jaw tightening. Marcus wasn't reacting. He wasn't nervous. wasn't shifting in discomfort. It was as if he had performed this exact dance 100 times before. She lowered her voice again, leaning in. "I don't feel safe." That changed everything. Clara's smile vanished. Her body went rigid. Marcus stopped typing. Across the aisle, a middle-aged man wearing a Bluetooth earpiece muttered, "Here we go again." Clara straightened up to her full height. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but could you please clarify what you mean by that?" Eleanor folded her hands neatly in her lap, tilting her head with an air of feigned vulnerability. "I just don't feel comfortable. She hesitated, letting the pause hang in the air long enough to imply a threat, without explicitly stating one. "I don't want to be difficult, but I think it would be for the best if someone else were to take this seat." Marcus closed his laptop with a soft, definitive click. This time, he looked her directly in the eye, and for the very first time, Eleanor felt a cold flicker of uncertainty. But Eleanor isn't letting this go, and now she's getting louder. A hush fell over the cabin, the sheer weight of Eleanor's words saturating the air. "I don't feel safe." The phrase possessed a unique power. It wasn't shouted, it didn't need to be. It was a carefully chosen weapon, designed to trigger an immediate, serious response. Clara, still standing beside her, didn't move for a long moment. Her posture grew even more rigid, and her eyes darted toward Marcus, who had now fully closed his laptop, his hands resting calmly on top of it. He wasn't smiling, he wasn't frowning, he simply stared at Eleanor, studying her with an unnerving intensity. Eleanor held his gaze, not wavering, not yet. Clara exhaled slowly. "Ma'am," she said, her voice carefully controlled, "are you saying that you feel threatened?" Eleanor tilted her head slightly, offering the smallest of shrugs. "I'm not saying that, I just don't feel comfortable. That's all." Across the aisle, the businessman with the Bluetooth scoffed and muttered, "Unbelievable." A young woman 3 rows back raised her phone slightly, feigning a text message but very clearly recording the entire exchange. A few other passengers began whispering amongst themselves, their heads turning in Eleanor's direction. Eleanor noticed. She could feel the subtle shift in the atmosphere, the tide of opinion beginning to turn against her, but she was not about to back down now. "This is a simple request," she continued, her voice dripping with false politeness. "I am just asking to be accommodated. If I'm uncomfortable, I should have the right to move seats, should I not?" Clara's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, as I have already checked, there are no other open first-class seats available." Eleanor pressed her lips together. "And in coach?" Clara hesitated. "There are 2 open seats in economy." Eleanor straightened her spine. "Perfect. He can take one of them." A low ripple of murmurs spread through the cabin like a contagion. Marcus inhaled deeply, his fingers drumming a single sharp tattoo on the surface of his laptop before falling still again. He wasn't arguing, wasn't responding, but he also wasn't moving an inch. Clara blinked, as if needing to replay Eleanor's words in her mind to ensure she had heard them correctly. "Ma'am?" Her voice was lower now, firmer. "Just to be clear, you want me to move this passenger to economy because you do not wish to sit next to him?" Eleanor gave a single, sharp nod, sitting even straighter. "Yes." Clara inhaled deeply through her nose. "That will not be happening." Eleanor's eyes snapped up. "Excuse me?" Clara folded her hands in front of her, her voice now unwavering. "Mr. Sterling has a first-class ticket, just like you. He is in his assigned seat. I cannot and I will not ask him to move." Eleanor's face flushed a deep, mottled red. She was losing control of the narrative. Passengers were now staring at her openly, some whispering, some shaking their heads in disgust. The young woman with the phone was still recording. Eleanor felt her stomach twist into a painful knot.
"This is ridiculous," she hissed.
"I am simply asking for the same courtesy that would be extended to anyone else who feels uncomfortable." Clara did not budge. "You are asking me to remove a paying passenger from his assigned first-class seat and relocate him to economy for no valid reason. That is not an accommodation. That is discrimination." A sharp, ringing silence followed her words. Someone let out a low whistle. Marcus had not moved, had not said a word. He just watched Eleanor waiting. Eleanor's pulse pounded in her ears. This was not how this was supposed to go. Clara squared her shoulders. "Ma'am, we are about to begin our taxi to the runway. If you cannot remain seated and follow the instructions of the flight crew, I will have to ask you to deplane." Eleanor's stomach dropped. "What?" Clara's tone remained professional, but was now laced with iron. "You have two options. You can stay in your seat quietly, or you can deplane. But Mr. Sterling is not moving." A few passengers broke into soft, spontaneous applause. Eleanor felt a wave of pure humiliation wash over her. This wasn't how things were supposed to work. She was never supposed to be the one being reprimanded. She opened her mouth, ready to unleash a torrent of argument. But before she could utter a sound, Marcus reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a dark leather case, flipped it open, and held it up. And just like that, everything changed. A gold FBI badge gleamed under the soft cabin lights. The very air in the plane seemed to shift. Eleanor's entire body went rigid. Passengers gasped. A few even chuckled. The young woman who was recording zoomed in immediately. Marcus's voice was calm even and utterly unreadable. "Ma'am," he said smoothly, tilting his head just so, "would you like to file an official complaint?" "I can take your statement right now." Eleanor's breath hitched in her throat. She couldn't speak. Marcus didn't move, didn't blink. He just waited, and for the first time, Eleanor Vance felt truly, utterly trapped. But Eleanor isn't just embarrassed. She's about to face real consequences. The silence in the cabin was thick, stretching uncomfortably between Eleanor and Marcus. His FBI badge glinted under the overhead lights, the gold emblem stark and unmistakable. It was the kind of thing you couldn't unsee, the kind of revelation that fundamentally alters the reality of a room. Passengers who had been whispering moments before were now staring openly, some smirking, others wide-eyed with shock. Eleanor's mouth went dry. Her brain frantically scrambled for an explanation, an excuse, any way out of this spiraling disaster. This was not supposed to happen. The man she had tried to have ejected from the plane, the man she had implied was a physical threat, was an agent of federal law enforcement. Her throat tightened. Marcus's expression had not changed one iota. He wasn't smiling or gloating. He just sat there, badge in one hand, his eyes locked onto hers, waiting. His voice was steady, level, and unreadable. "Would you like to file an official complaint, ma'am?" The words hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Eleanor's body felt frozen, a hot flush of shame creeping up her neck. She tried to speak, but all that emerged was a faint, strangled I. Marcus tilted his head slightly. "You said you felt uncomfortable," he continued, his tone polite but sharp as a razor. "That's a serious allegation on a federal flight. If you believe I have done something inappropriate, I would be more than happy to take your statement." Eleanor's stomach plummeted. She could feel it happening, the complete and total shift. Moments ago, she had been the one controlling the narrative. She had expected sympathy, expected anyone to validate her position. But now she was the one under the microscope. A man, 2 rows ahead, let out a low chuckle. "Oh, this is priceless," he muttered, shaking his head. The young woman who was recording zoomed in on Eleanor's face. Clara, the flight attendant, stood nearby with her arms crossed, her face a mask of careful neutrality. But there was something in her eyes, a silent understanding, a quiet expectation. She was waiting. Everyone was waiting. Eleanor's breath came in fast, shallow gasps. She couldn't admit she had lied. She couldn't say she had invented the entire scenario just to get rid of him. But if she doubled down, if she pushed forward with her claim, she would be accusing a federal agent of being a danger on a flight. And that, she knew, would come with severe consequences. Her hands trembled in her lap. Marcus had not looked away. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Eleanor shook her head, the movement barely perceptible. "No," she croaked. "No complaint." Marcus gave a single sharp nod, as if this was the outcome he had anticipated all along. Slowly he closed the badge holder, tucked it back inside his jacket, and reopened his laptop. Just like that, it was over. At least it was for him. For Eleanor, the nightmare was just beginning. A few passengers murmured their approval. A couple even clapped softly. The businessman across the aisle smirked and returned to his newspaper. The young woman with the phone, she was already typing furiously. Eleanor could feel her heart pounding against her ribs. She wanted to melt into her seat, to disappear, to rewind time and undo the last 10 minutes of her life. But there was no undoing this. She had publicly embarrassed herself. She had been exposed, and worse, people had seen it, recorded it. Her eyes darted around the cabin, desperately searching for an ally, someone who might offer even a flicker of a sympathetic look. No one did. Even Clara, the one person who had been so patient with her, had lost all the warmth in her expression. Eleanor swallowed hard. She wanted to argue, wanted to say something, anything to regain control. But she knew deep down that there was nothing left to say. The flight wasn't even off the ground yet, and somehow she had already lost everything. But Eleanor isn't just embarrassed. She's about to face real consequences. Eleanor sat rigidly in her seat, staring straight ahead, her breathing shallow, her face a mask of burning shame. This was not just embarrassment.
This was a public demolition.
Marcus had already moved on. He had flipped his laptop open again, his fingers tapping calmly on the keyboard. It was as if she had ceased to exist. The rest of the cabin, however, had not forgotten. Across the aisle, the businessman with the Bluetooth smirked to himself. The woman who was recording had stopped typing, but her phone was still angled slightly upward, as if waiting for Eleanor to provide an encore. Even the other flight attendants, the ones who were supposed to remain neutral, had a different air about them now. Clara, the lead flight attendant, stood nearby, watching. Eleanor felt it all, the crushing weight of their stares, the quiet judgment hanging in the air. She had miscalculated, horribly. Her fingers twitched in her lap, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm. This was not some minor misunderstanding she could smooth over with a forced laugh and a dismissive wave. She had tried to have an FBI agent removed from his seat, on camera. The implications were finally settling in, heavy and suffocating in her chest. Her mouth was dry. Clara finally stepped closer, her tone still polite but no longer soft. "Ma'am," she said, keeping her voice low, "I need to confirm that you are okay to remain on this flight without any further disruption." Eleanor stiffened. A handful of passengers glanced over, pretending not to eavesdrop, but absolutely listening. She wanted to snap, wanted to demand why she was the one being treated like the problem when all she had done was express her discomfort. But Marcus's badge had changed the entire equation. She was trapped now, the power she thought she wielded completely gone. She forced her lips into what she hoped was a calm expression. "I'm fine." Clara's gaze lingered for a moment, then she slowly nodded. "I'm going to hold you to that." Then she turned and walked away. Eleanor exhaled a shaky breath, clenching her hands together in her lap. It was over. At least that's what she thought. A sharp chime broke the silence. She looked up just as the young woman with the phone smirked at her screen and tapped it twice. Eleanor's stomach clenched. She knew that look. She had seen it on her own grandchildren's faces when they shared something online, something designed to spread like wildfire. Her fingers tightened around the armrest. She turned slightly, her heart pounding, and stole a glance at the woman's screen. The video was already uploaded. Eleanor felt as if the air had been violently knocked from her lungs. The caption was brutally simple. "Racist woman tries to remove black man from first class, then learns he's FBI." Eleanor's hands went cold. The flight wasn't even in the air yet, and somehow her life was already in ruins. And if it was already online, that meant there was no stopping what would come next. She turned her head forward again, trying to steady her breathing, trying to convince herself that maybe it wouldn't be so bad. Maybe no one would care. Maybe it wouldn't spread. Maybe? Her phone vibrated in her purse once, twice, a third time. Eleanor's chest tightened. She didn't want to look. She didn't want to know. But her hands moved on their own, digging into her bag, fingers wrapping around the cool metal of the device. She pulled it out and her stomach dropped. Text messages from acquaintances, from family, from people she hadn't heard from in months. Each one was a variation of the same horrified question. "Eleanor, is this you?" "Just saw a video." "Tell me this isn't real." "Oh my God, what did you do?" Her heartbeat roared in her ears. She swiped open her browser with trembling hands and tapped on the Twitter icon. It took less than a second. Her name was already trending. The video had been uploaded less than 5 minutes ago, and yet it had already been viewed over 20,000 times. And the comments, they were pouring in. Eleanor's vision blurred as she read the first few. Karma is real. This lady really thought she could get away with it. Hope she enjoys the internet roasting she's about to get. Eleanor's breath hitched. Her world wasn't just collapsing, it was burning to the ground. And for the first time, Eleanor Vance realized there was no coming back from this. But what happens after the flight lands is beyond Eleanor's worst fears. Eleanor gripped her phone so tightly that her knuckles turned bone white. The ambient cabin noise faded into a dull background roar, drowned out by the frantic pounding of her own pulse. She could barely breathe. The video was still spreading, the view count ticking relentlessly higher every time she refreshed. 30,000 views. 42,000. 61,000. It wasn't slowing down. It was accelerating. She blinked rapidly, her mind scrambling for an escape, a way to stop this before it was too late. But it was already too late. She swiped down, reading more of the merciless comments. Imagine being this entitled, LMAO. She really thought she was going to get away with it. The FBI part made my whole day. Instant karma. Expose her name. We need to know who she is. Her chest tightened. She glanced around the cabin, as if searching for a way to reverse time itself. But nobody was looking at her anymore. They didn't need to. They had seen enough. She shifted in her seat, her whole body rigid. Marcus, still sitting beside her, hadn't moved. His fingers tapped lightly on his laptop keyboard. If he was aware of the video's existence, he gave no indication. He didn't care, and that somehow made everything infinitely worse. Eleanor's phone buzzed again. She flinched, then looked down. Her sister. She hesitated, then pressed the decline button with a shaky finger. She was not ready for that conversation. She was not ready for any of this. The plane had barely even taken off, and yet her world was already collapsing around her. She exhaled sharply, forcing herself to stay calm. She needed a plan, a strategy, a way to fix this. She could apologize. Maybe that would help. No, that would only fuel the fire. She could ignore it. Pretend she hadn't seen the video. No, that was even worse. Her mind raced, her thoughts colliding, spiraling into chaos. And then the pilot's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our descent into Washington. D.C., the local time is 5:43 p.m. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened as we prepare for landing. Eleanor's heart dropped. Landing. She had been so consumed by the chaos inside the plane that she had completely forgotten about what was waiting for her outside of it. She refreshed the video one last time. 97,000 views. Her name was trending. Her hand shook as she stuffed her phone back into her bag, trying to convince herself that she could still get ahead of this. That maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't be as bad as she thought. But Eleanor still hopes the storm will pass until she turns on the news. Eleanor practically bolted off the plane the second the doors opened. She ignored the side glances, the quiet chuckles, the unspoken judgment that hung heavy in the air. She just needed to get out. But as she hurried into Reagan National Airport, her pulse skipped a beat at what she saw. Waiting near baggage claim was a cluster of reporters. It wasn't a huge crowd, not yet, but it was enough. A woman in a navy blazer held a microphone near her lips, reading from her phone as a cameraman filmed her. The now viral video shows an unidentified woman attempting to have an FBI agent removed from first class, citing discomfort. The clip has gained over 1 million views in just a few hours. Eleanor stopped breathing. 1 million. That was impossible. She turned her head quickly, praying they hadn't seen her. But one of the reporters locked eyes with her. The woman's face lit up with recognition. Wait, that's her. Eleanor spun on her heel, pure panic spiking in her chest. She could not be seen like this. She moved fast, her heels clicking sharply against the polished tile floor. She needed to get to the exit now. But her phone buzzed violently in her purse. Texts, missed calls, alerts. She couldn't outrun it. She shoved past a group of travelers, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps, her hands clammy. She barely made it to the curb before her name was shouted behind her. Miss Vance, do you have a response to the video? She winced. She hadn't even realized her name had been released yet. A taxi slowed near the curb, and she nearly threw herself into the back seat. Go, she snapped at the driver. Now. He raised an eyebrow but pulled away from the curb without a word. Eleanor pressed her hands to her temples, her eyes squeezed shut. 1 million views. Her stomach churned. She had built her entire life on careful reputation management. A good image, a respected name. And in a single afternoon it was all gone. Her phone vibrated again. This time it was a number she didn't recognize. She stared at it, her heart hammering. Then just before it went to voicemail, she swiped to answer. Hello? A brief silence, then a clipped, formal voice. Miss Vance, this is Julian Croft, chair of the Sterling Worth Foundation. I assume you're aware of the situation. Eleanor's mouth went dry. She had been on the Sterling Worth Foundation board for years, a charity that prided itself on its progressive image, its inclusivity, and ethical leadership. And she already knew what this call was about. She swallowed. Julian, we're going to need you to step down, he interrupted immediately. Eleanor stared blankly ahead. It was not a request. It was an order. Her pulse drummed in her ears. But this is being taken out of context. The board disagrees. His voice was flat, final. We'll issue a public statement by morning. We expect your resignation by then, a sharp beep. He had hung up. Eleanor lowered the phone slowly. Her career was over. Her reputation was gone. And the worst part was no one cared about her explanation. They had seen the video, and the video was enough. She let out a shaky breath. This wasn't something she could control. This was something she had done to herself. And now she had to live with it. Meanwhile, Marcus Sterling hadn't even spared her another thought. By now he was probably in a meeting, completely unbothered, his life entirely untouched. Because for him, this had been just another Tuesday. If this story made you think, don't forget to subscribe for more gripping real-life scenarios.